We just witnessed maybe the most anticipated NBA regular season matchup of the year. The Thunder had won 14 straight games without arguably their second best player, holding a record of 29-5 as they stood head and shoulders above the West. But coming into OKC was the defending champion Celtics, and this game didn't disappoint for even a second, delivering a classic that may just end up previewing this year's NBA Finals. The staple of this Thunder team all year has been a historically dominant defense, and to open up this one, they didn't do anything too crazy with the matchups. They started with Jalen Williams on Jaylen Brown, and soft switched any screens involving their wings, as each one can pretty much switch across the board. On the other side, Boston got a bit more creative. Reminiscent of last year's finals, they started with Porzingis on Lou Dort so that he could play more like a free safety and shut off things in the paint. And the main idea of this strategy is to get a guy like Drew Holiday on Isaiah Hartenstein so that you can switch on all screens. Notice how Shea waves off this one to instead attack Brown one-on-one as he gets to the rim for two. You'll see that strategy in full effect on this play. J-Dub sets up the pick and roll with Hartenstein, and Drew just jumps out to the ball on a switch. There's no advantage created, while Kristaps continues to hang back in the paint, basically daring Wallace to take the jumper. One counter by the Thunder was to have whoever Kristaps was guarding set the ball screen instead. That way, Shea's able to turn the corner on a drive and attack the slower-footed big. And so they did that a few times in the first. This time it's Kaysen who's going to set the screen, and because Kristaps is in a drop, Shea's left with a ton of room to get downhill. He applies pressure, then drops it off to iHart for that automatic floater. They occasionally even went to a double drag setup, with Kaysen setting the first screen while iHart sets another on his own man, and the idea is to get Shea as much room to drive as possible, where he's able to create for himself or get others involved. And to be honest, he got pretty much whatever he wanted in this first quarter, consistently touching the paint as he scored 11 points. Like I said though, the identity of this OKC team is their defense, and so the Celtics had to find a way to break them down. One way they did that was by playing fast, looking to attack in early offense with every possibility. And that doesn't just mean quick isolations. They were actively running transition pick and rolls before the defense could set up, and putting a ton of pressure on the rim. Not only does pace leave the defense a lot more vulnerable to openings and breakdowns, it also opens up the door for lots of cross matches. This time iHart finds himself on Derek White, and when they try to switch him off the ball, White responds by immediately pulling the trigger from three. A play later, iHart was switched onto the ball once again, but now it's Jason Tatum, who of course attacks the mismatch one-on-one and gets to a bucket. So what OKC did to respond is they went to a zone. They wanted to protect the paint without giving up mismatches in hopes that they could force the Celtics into settling for early threes. And that's exactly what ended up happening. Boston's counter was simple though. Get back to playing with pace so the zone can't ever set up, and look for any slight advantage to attack. Typically, that meant having one of the Jays isolate a favorable matchup, and because both are big, physical wings, they create all sorts of mismatch issues. On this one, you're going to see Jaylen Brown post up Shea in early offense, and nobody comes to help, so he easily gets to the rim for 2 plus a foul. Then just a play later, it's Tatum who gets cross-matched with Shea, and he too likes the matchup, so he puts his head down on a drive and earns a trip to the line. On the other side of things, after Horford checked in for Kristaps, they continued to stick to the same scheme. Any actions involving iHart would be immediately switched between the wings, basically turning OKC's offense into a game of one-on-ones with no advantage. Like I said though, Shea didn't have much trouble getting where he needed to go. The problem is that when he got to the paint, Horford was basically abandoning the weak side to overplay the paint, which really mucked things up. They made it clear that they simply didn't believe in Lou Dort as a shooter, consistently leaving him open and daring him to make them pay from the three-point line. Just watch Horford on this possession. He's matched up with Jay Will, but all he cares about is Shea, shadowing his drive and staying glued to the ball all the way up until the moment Shea decides to attempt a shot. It wasn't just Horford, but Cornette when he came into the game. Shea turns the corner and both bigs just pack the paint. Shea makes the right read on a kick out to Wiggins, who isn't able to knock down the three. About a minute later, it's the exact same thing. Horford's gonna play the pick and roll in a drop, while Kornet sits under the basket as a third line of defense. That's a really tough shot, even for Shea. In the closing seconds of the quarter, though, they finally exploited their biggest advantage. Kornet simply isn't quick enough to stick with Wiggins one-on-one, and by running the offense through that matchup, they get a layup. All that just for the Celtics to come down and continue doing exactly what they've been doing, with Tatum screening to get Shea switched onto him before sealing off position for an isolation. He gets the entry pass, draws a foul, and that's gonna wrap up scoring for the first. After 12 minutes, the score was 35-32, Boston hanging on to a 3-point lead. In the second, the Celtics went with a twin tower lineup of both Kornet and Porzingis. Again, you're going to see both bigs overcommit to the paint, but this time Aaron Wiggins is ready to make them pay on an outside jumper. With Shea on the bench, it was J-Dub who was expected to create these advantages, and I'd argue he did an incredible job of getting everyone involved. He knows that Porzingis and Kornet are gonna be dropping to the paint, and with timely kickout passes, he was able to create multiple open threes. Not only was he making good plays as a passer, he was also getting some decent looks for himself. Here's one where he takes Holiday in isolation and rises up for a jumper, and next time down, he immediately hunts for Kristaps on a cross match before pulling back out for an isolation. That's a big time speed advantage, easily getting around him and drawing a foul. Of course, the Celtics were having their way as well, and it once again started with Jaylen Brown attacking any and every matchup in isolation. This play really stood out to me though. It starts with Isaiah Joe on Jaylen, and watch as Wiggins perfectly times up a late double to blindside him. He fumbles a little bit and does get the ball out, but the result is a turnover. And the reason I think this play was really important is because it sort of foreshadowed a little bit about how the game would end up later on. More on that later though. The true story of this early second quarter run from Boston was the way Porzingis absolutely abused mismatches in the post. The Thunder made it clear that they were willing to switch all actions involving Kristaps, to which he responded by immediately sealing off position in the middle, where he's basically impossible to stop after he catches the ball. And that becomes even tougher when you remember there's another 7-footer on the floor. Watch Ihart. He sees a potential dump-off opportunity to Kornet and positions himself to help, only for the ball to find a cutting Porzingis. This is where you really miss the presence of a second rim protector in Chet Holmgren. OKC's roster is pretty small, and this twin tower lineup took complete advantage. As a result, Ihart was forced to heavily overplay the paint, which makes things a lot easier for Jaylen to turn the corner and get where he wants to go. Here's a great example. As Jaylen sets up pick and roll, Ihart has to sit way back in a deep drop. And to prevent Jaylen from driving middle, Wiggins comes over to protect the nail, leaving Derek White on the wing as he draws a long closeout, then puts it down on a drive and pulls up for a jumper of his own. I want to give a huge shout out to Jaylen for the performance he had in this first half. Not only was he a walking mismatch, taking every opportunity to get easy buckets, the guy was making everything, and that resulted in 21 first half points with only 4 missed shots. When Shea checked back in for OKC's offense, not much changed from the first. They still had everyone following him wherever he went, he was still creating a bunch of open shots, and they still weren't capitalizing. On this play, you can see quite literally the entire defense react. 3 different helpers touching the paint, and he finds Kenrich Williams on an island up top, who finally pours in 3 points. It was very clear that if Shea wanted to force the issue, he'd have to do one of 2 things. He could either drive into a tough look, or he could play from out in space and try to rely on the jumper, although that can be a bit streakier. And Shea, being the scoring talent that he is, of course still found ways to produce. This time he attacks Kristaps in that drop, probes with his live dribble, and finds a little opening near the baseline where he can turn and hit a jumper. But after that bucket, both offenses went completely cold to close out the half. For Boston, it was a simple case of the 3-ball not falling, as they ended up making just a measly 27% of their 22 attempts. And for OKC, it was mostly the same. They had such a poor drought of threes that even Isaiah Hartenstein decided to try one, and after nearly 3 minutes without a single point, Shea finally broke the drought on a wide open triple of his own. That takes us to the halfway point, where the Celtics held a comfortable 10-point lead. To start the third though, the Thunder came out with a few key defensive adjustments. The first was about matchups. They moved Lou Dort onto Jaylen Brown in hopes that they could avoid some of those mismatches. Their second adjustment was how they handled screening action. Like I said, Dort's gonna start on Jaylen, but when he's screened, Ihart's gonna pick up Jaylen on an immediate switch. Remember that play from earlier where I said it foreshadowed the rest of the game. Dort's gonna come back to the ball with that late double, and although Jaylen makes the right read, they scramble to literal perfection, and the result is a contested 3. With Dort now on Jaylen, it meant that J-Dub was the one who got the Tatum assignment, and not only is he a pretty capable physical matchup, OKC continued to switch everything involving him as well in an effort to completely take away the paint. And when I say switch everything, I'm not just talking between wings. When Ihart's involved, he's gonna switch onto the ball too, and notice how Kaysen comes over to aggressively play the pass to Porzingis. The only option is to skip it to Drew, which OKC again scrambles to cover as they get a hand up on the 3. The idea was to make Boston live and die at the 3-point line. Even on a pick and pop with Porzingis, they're gonna switch and make him shoot over the top. The big risk that comes with this is the fact that Tatum's a top-tier isolationist, so if you allow him to consistently get the matchup he wants, he will get some buckets. This time he's going to work against a much smaller Kaysen Wallace and uses his size to get to the mid-range where he can rise up over the top on a jumper. But the Thunder, of course, weren't just gonna let him get his, so they went back to that adjustment of sending a late double to get the ball out of his hands. And because they have so much speed on the floor, they're able to cover everyone as the ball moves around, while their guards can protect the rim. With all of these switches taking place and the late doubles coming with aggression to take the ball out of Tatum's hands, other guys were forced to make tough decisions, which meant lots and lots of rushed threes. It also meant lots and lots of turnovers, because if there's one thing this OKC defense excels at, it's making plays on the ball. So, like I said, constant switching to always have a body in front of the ball, perfect scrambling, and timely doubles basically eliminated all of the rim pressure from Boston's offense. The Celtics responded by emptying the clip, to which they shot 1 of 13 from 3, or 7.7%. After a 65-point first half, they were held to just 15 in this third, a complete defensive masterclass. In order to cut into a deficit though, it's gonna take some scoring, and this third quarter on the other side of the ball was very interesting. Boston actually switched up their strategy, putting Kristaps on Ihart instead of having him roam. Which sounds like it would be a big deal, but OKC switched up their approach a little bit as well. Instead of using screens, they decided to just get completely out of Shea's way altogether and let him attack whoever's guarding him one-on-one. Shea is one of the best isolation scorers ever, so it really didn't matter who the Celtics tried, he was getting to his spots. A few minutes in, the Celtics went back to Kristaps on Dort, and right away you can see the impact. With him roaming behind the play, J-Dub isn't looking to get the ball to Ihart, instead kicking it out to Wallace, who's unable to hit the 3. And as long as Kristaps continues to patrol the paint, just completely ignoring the 3-point line, OKC's offense will become reliant on shooters knocking down these shots, but they just kept missing. When Horford came in, it was the exact same thing, and Dort was really struggling to get much of anything going, missing all of his first 8 shot attempts. The most important thing for me though is that the process was there. The Thunder were hitting the right pressure points, making the right decisions, and this is the exact type of shot you want on any given possession. If you keep creating looks like that time and time again, eventually something has to fall, which is what started to happen towards the end of this quarter. They hit a couple threes. When Shai was being denied the ball, he had an awesome backdoor cut for easy points at the rim. Oh, and all of that defense they were playing on the other end also led to some offense, with this fast break in particular cutting the lead down to 1. A technical foul and a tough bucket from Porzingis later though, and we've arrived at the end of the third, a 4-point game with 12 minutes to go. These minutes to start the fourth with Shai and Tatum on the bench were maybe the most crucial stretch of the game. And of course, what stole the show was OKC's defense. They continued to switch every action, especially ones involving Jalen. And when Jalen goes to work in isolation, you're also going to see some aggressive help coming from the middle, once again forcing Boston to live on the three-point line. In the event that Jalen started to attack the middle, that's when a wing would come over from the weak side with a late double, and this time the ball doesn't even make it to the open shooter. Kenrich Williams in particular did an amazing job defending Jalen one-on-one. He didn't let him create any driving angles and consistently funneled him into that help near the middle. But that wasn't the only adjustment from OKC. They also took a page out of Boston's book, putting a wing on Porzingis so that they could use Ihart as their own free safety. The Celtics had a similar counter, using Ihart's matchup as the screener, but the Thunder just continued to switch and switch over and over again, and that's how you end up with a Derek White isolation. On the other end, they got just enough production from their role guys to stay afloat without Shai. Wiggins hit this huge three to cut it down to 1, and Kaysen had a couple of big buckets in transition, this time going right at Horford for a tough finish, and a play later turning defense into offense. So by the time the Stars came back into the game, OKC had actually taken a 2-point lead. That's when the Thunder decided to play their final chess piece, the micro ball lineup with J-Dub at the 5. Now they can really switch everything and completely eliminate dribble penetration. Like I said earlier, this is a risky play with Tatum on the floor because he's such an elite isolation player, but they had one thing going for them. The Celtics couldn't throw a rock into the ocean, so even when Tatum breaks down the defense and the ball finds the open man, they aren't taking advantage. They shot 2 of 11 from 3 in the fourth, making them 3 of 24 overall in the second half, a putrid 12.5%. It got to a point where they came completely unglued and had not 1, but 2 illegal screens in a span of a couple minutes. Meanwhile, it was time for the Thunder to throw their final blow, and that of course came in the form of Shai isolations. He continued to surgically pick apart the defense and get whatever he wanted, with this step back 3 nearly taking the roof off of the arena. Then when Boston finally did get a stopped, and it looked like they had an advantage in transition, Shai got up for a massive chase down block, prompting maybe the most exciting stretch of the year that ended in this massive lob to Ihart. From there, they clearly had the Celtics figured out, and as long as they stuck to their principles, they'd easily be able to close out this game. The most important one, of course, being the way they defended Jalen, letting anyone switch onto him and swarming drives with late help to take him out of his comfort zone. And to say that worked would be an understatement. After that near flawless first half, he dropped an egg, 0 of 7 shooting, 0 assists, and 2 turnovers. The Thunder basically took him out of the game entirely. Quite literally, the only Celtic producing any offense in this second half was Tatum, who tried his hardest to keep his team in the game down the stretch. But when Kristaps came back in, it was time for the inevitable. He's going to continue playing free safety, roaming off of Dort, and it was time for Lou to hit a dagger. And then another one, and then another one. After shooting 1 of 10 in the first 3 quarters, Dort went a perfect 4 of 4 in the fourth, including 3 threes to put the game out of reach. After that last one, they were up by 13, and it was only a matter of running the clock out to that final buzzer. Shea was an absolute machine in this game, putting up 33 points, 11 rebounds, and 6 assists to go along with 5 stocks, while seemingly nobody else besides Wiggins could produce consistent offense. But the story of this one was OKC's defense. After giving up that 65-point first half, they made a few key adjustments and turned into the 2004 Pistons, then gave up 27 points in the second. No, you didn't hear that wrong. The Celtics only scored 27 points over the last 24 minutes. Through all 4 quarters, they shot an impressively bad 9 of 46 from 3, and while I don't expect them to shoot that poorly again, we should definitely credit the Thunder for forcing them into uncomfortable and rushed looks. They also forced 18 turnovers, meaning that Boston actually had a negative assist to turnover ratio. Oh, and it feels worthy of a reminder that OKC did this without their best defensive player and another guy who's made back-to-back all-defensive teams. We're looking at one of the best defensive teams ever, and after what might have been an NBA Finals preview, they're now standing 7.5 games ahead of anyone in the West with a record of 30-5. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out the Hoop Venue podcast and my social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you thought of this game. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.